200 cops, Schultzy, how you going?
Good, mate. Good. And mate, how's it going down there? We're a little bit wet up here.
We're soaked as well, mate. There's cloud from bloody Darwin to God knows where, Bandy. It's all
Yeah.
over the place. Yeah, no, it's wild. It's no, I did not. We're not getting crazy rain, but we're just wet. It just won't stop. But um, I tell you where I spent a bit of time in Junda, which is south when I was a kid. My dad was working for the council out there when I was just starting school, so grade one. And we had a few floods out there, and they're fully flooding at the moment. So a bit of a shout out to the Channel Country of Western Queensland because they're underwater.
Yep. And
Mm.
mate, as far as I read, they're going to be copping it for quite a bit apparently over the
Yeah,
next few days.
yeah. I
So
spoke to the old fella today, and he'd spoken to someone out there who he used to work with, and they said, "Oh, they don't expect to see the Thompson River Bridge for weeks." So
wow.
it's not like here where there's a little tiny catchment. There's a massive catchment out there, and it's all raining. So yeah, there's a
Yeah.
hell of a lot of rain out there.
Yeah. So,
Mm.
oh mate, you want me to move on to some of the contact we've had from last
Yeah,
week?
yeah.
Yep.
So I'll just recap the last week. So we spoke about the recruiting, dropping of standards of recruitment, and how that's not good for anybody. So we don't want to be alarmists. We don't want to carry on. We're not in the inner sanctum, but we like to get evidence of what we're thinking and push that through. We don't want to blow it out to extremes, but some of the things I'm hearing are quite scary, and they should be scary for the community too. So we've had a bit of feedback, mate.
Yeah, a little bit, mate. And I won't mention any names or numbers or anything like that, but a few people got in contact with us, and one even from a different jurisdiction that finished the college not that long ago, and yeah, they said that we basically nailed it right on the head. So and they said, and I said, I sent back a message. I said, oh, yeah, if you got any more information, there he goes. I tell you what, he said, if I started telling you, you'd just make you pissed off. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, I think what we were trying to get at there is that we all we joke and we enjoyed ourselves, but there's a lot of people who could never do this job. It's very very difficult at times. It's very confrontational. It's talk about being offended, mate. You're not well in the Northern Territory. There's case law that police officers cannot be offended by words or actions or whatever else.
yep.
Everyone else in the community can, and we're still human, but no, can't be offended. So therefore, it was never used for. I think someone had reacted to something they said and assaulted them, and basically it was found by the learned magistrate that police officers can't be offended. So
Yep.
no
So,
worries.
and as a result, mate, I remember if somebody was using offensive language and we wanted to either give them a ticket, for the under the social order offences, we had to actually grab a member of the public and ask them if
Yeah.
they were offended by that.
Yep.
And that's how we could get it across the line because as police officers, we can't be offended by foul language.
No. No, that's right. And it's funny talking about being offended. I only ever get offended when I care about the opinion of somebody. If I
Yeah.
don't care about the opinion of someone,
Oh,
anything that comes out of their head doesn't even register with me. So that's one way of looking at it. Like you can react and be reactive your whole life, and you'll just go through life angry and sad and upset, or you can just go, "Oh God, who gives a shit what they say?"
yeah. That's
So that's the way I look at it.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly, mate. It's like water off a duck's back,
yeah.
and like I think I've mentioned it before. I care what my friends think, and
Oh yeah.
people I respect think. Anybody else, mate, I don't give two hoots.
No,
Jesus, yeah, throw whatever you
no,
want at me. I don't care. Just
no.
don't pick on my friends or my family.
That's right. Especially morons. When a
Yeah,
moron's
that's
talking
right.
and I'm with people and they're going, "Oh, he shouldn't say that." I was like, who cares what he says? He's a moron. Like
Mm, mm.
who gives a shit? His words are irrelevant. It's
That's
like
right.
comments on we get the odd funny old comment on Facebook and all the rest, and I just think, mate, you've probably never had your heart go up with any level of adrenaline. You probably sit in your mummy's basement, which is an American thing, but anyway, just criticizing people online. You are an irrelevant human being, as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned, and
Well,
that's so. Why would I care about your comment?
yeah, yeah, well,
Uh,
exactly, mate. Actually, one thing I thought might be funny, and look, let us know. I can bring up a few of the comments come over YouTube because they are funny. They are
yeah,
really funny. Some of the shit they come up with, and I thought maybe we could have a funny one. Just
yeah,
the keyboard warriors, mate.
yeah. That's it. That's it. Yeah. So, hey, what are we on about today, mate?
Well, mate, funnily enough, we're talking about, I suppose, a court ruling in relation to cops not being able to be offended,
Hmm.
especially in the Northern Territory. I'm not sure if any other jurisdictions. So, if do you know more about that,
Yeah,
Damo?
so it wasn't actually a magistrate. It must have been because it became case law, so it must have been a Supreme Court judge.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter where that happens; it's relevant to all jurisdictions. So it was definitely a Northern Territory finding, and it had something to do with it had something to do with the initial arrest. Old mate resisted arrest. He was being arrested for something that offended the police officer. Basically, he was found not guilty of a string of charges of assault, police resist arrest, all the rest of it, because they found that offensive language and like when I say offensive language, he was saying some pretty wild stuff. It wasn't just a few f bombs. It was basically personal attacks and sexual acts on children, against his whatever else. And the cop arrested him, but they said no, police officers shouldn't be offended by that. They hear it all the time, and that was the finding, and that became case law. And the reason I know it's relevant in other jurisdictions is because I've had a Queensland police officer who I knew quite well when I was in the job come out with, oh yeah, that old piece, that old chestnut from the Northern Territory that made none of us offended by anything. Thanks for that. So yeah, I think today it's an interesting thing. I think we had a bit of a discussion off air, and this week in New South Wales, I believe it is, a New South Wales police officer has been charged with, and I don't know the exact offences, but there's domestic violence related offences, and a magistrate or somebody has made public comment around police granting bail to another police officer and how it should have been reviewed. Well, I mean, you know, the cases are there where police officers have been denied bail by other police. It's not, they wouldn't have necessarily known the people, but I can certainly see how the outsiders can see a conflict of interest. So what we thought we'd do is we'd talk about the relationship between police and the courts and the judicial process. So the two sides, we've got the adversarial system in Australia where the prosecution makes the allegation. The prosecution must prove all the points of proof of any offences that they've alleged, and a defence, and everyone's entitled to representation. So, defence's job is to try and negate or come up with a reason why that person didn't do what they did. So, that's more in the hearing or the trial setting where there's actually a no, you've got to prove all this stuff. And what we might do is just talk about the practicalities of that relationship between the police on the ground and the judiciary. So the
Yeah.
judicial officers being lawyers and magistrates and judges.
Yeah, yeah. Well, mate, if you don't mind, I might kick it off, and I know you probably had about a very similar experience because we went bush very early on, and part of that learning was the sergeant's. I still remember the first time. I think it was Charlie actually. He got me to call magistrate in relation to a bail application. So for anybody listening, if police gave bail originally, which is within the legislation, depending on the offence, so on and so forth. Um, Police were allowed, if they were arrested on a breach of bail, we could actually bail again. However, if they were arrested or bailed in relation to a magistrate, you had to go back to the magistrate for bail
Mm.
application again. And I know early on, I did a few. So what you do, part of the thing is going through their history. The magistrate will ask you a number of different, I suppose, explanations as why you refuse or pro bail, and then you just run through it. But you go through the criminal history. You tell them what their breach is or what they've been arrested on, and then you go through and go from there. I, mate, I have lost count how many I have done. I built a
Oh, it'd be
reputation
thousands.
very.
It'd be
So yeah,
thousands.
it would
Yeah.
be. It would literally, like, honestly, people. The Northern Territory is a small place, but I had magistrates. They would call me Schultzy
Mm.
when I rang up, and they knew me very well. Now, with that, we've spoken about how your reputation is very important. So a lot of magistrates would actually ask my opinion a lot of the time of what I thought because they knew I was very fair in relation to whether they should be remanded or whether they should be getting bail, which was, quite a compliment, which I liked.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I've literally done thousands, and a lot of the time, I knew a lot of the magistrates. Some of them, I suppose, personally, I knew them on a off work occasions. I'd run into them, and so a lot of the time they would get me to call up because I'd done so many in the past, and I was yeah. Look, I I once got a kid remanded who was 14. He had no convictions against him. He had two warrants for unlawful entry, and I spoke to the most lenient magistrate in the Northern Territory, and I got that kid remanded from a bush station. But it's because I knew which buttons to push, and I knew what was important to that magistrate, and what they would care about. So
Yeah, but even then, like we'll just take it back a step. So getting people remanded in custody is it's not necessarily a personal challenge. It can be if you desperately need that person removed from a community because of the just ongoing shitstorm they're creating.
yeah,
And it's the sell of this. All right, yeah. Look, it looks that you'd be leaning towards bail. However, you'd go away from that. It would be that there is no family support whatsoever. The child is fending for themselves. Secondly, they have proven now on two occasions that they can't appear before the court. Thirdly, there is absolutely no doubt they will reoffend because they've been continually offending and it's become habitual. Um, and also, you then talk about the safety of the child in the community. So you talk about the child is not safe when they're out committing offences. They're breaking into houses. People can react in all kinds of ways. You don't know whose house they're breaking into. And this for victims, this will give them the shits. But the fact is that sometimes we use this because it's this kid's going to get flogged by somebody
yep,
who they're breaking into. They're putting themselves at extreme risk, and that comes down to driving cars in pursuits. That's more of a regional centre thing. But
yep.
there's lots of different people don't understand that the consideration process that goes on for bail, and
Well,
it is fairly substantial.
look, I'll just cut in there. As
Mm,
you're talking about some of the considerations, the reason why he got remanded was the fact that he was leading about another a dozen kids who were under the age of 10 into unlawful entry, but not only that, inhaling volatile substances,
yeah.
which is a massive danger to those young children. We've had cases, and I know you were down, especially down south. They were
Mm.
quite bad, I think, down in Tennant Creek. But we had cases, especially in Arnhem Land, where doctors would say if they inhaled again that night, they could possibly die.
Mate, I
So
put three young, they're all young adults, they weren't teenagers, but I put three young adults petrol sniffing in body bags. Not to mention the just countless numbers of petrol sniffing kids we came across. It was more prevalent in the desert, but even when I turned up, they'd sort of nipped it in the bud a bit when I turned up down in the desert. When we first left the college, it was enormous down in the desert, but not so much up where we were up north. But what would happen was we'd get the odd kid who'd done time down there through certain social post, like basically disciplinary processes where they'd been put in places, not necessarily in custody, and they'd come back to Catherine and they'd learnt this from the desert kids, and yeah, they'd bring it back and introduce it to kids in Catherine. So one of them, it was probably fortunate for the young people of Catherine, very unfortunate for this young fella, but he sniffed himself to death in Catherine, and that was one of my jobs. So I've seen firsthand how it kills people real quick. Young, fit, young Aboriginal kids, fit, not lean as anything, hyper fit, hyper bloody athletic, and next minute
yep.
just stone cold dead from inhaling volatile substances.
And not only that, mate. Before we go back to the bailing and all that process, but there's also young, I suppose they're older teenagers, even in their 20s, and they're walking around like zombies because
Oh
they've
yeah.
just destroyed their brain cells. That was quite a common thing. I know out at Millingimby, we had quite a couple of those just from sniffing volatile substances. So it's yeah, no, it's definitely pretty serious. But I think in going back to, so you either make an application to bail or application to remand the person in custody, and there's a difference. So police do. um, I can't actually remember the bail act off the top of my head, but police do have the power to give bail without going to a magistrate on certain
Yeah, of course.
circumstances.
Yep.
And so that is, so if they see fit that the person should get bail and it's within the bail act, then yes, they can give bail. And look, there's a number of reasons why they would, and there's also a number of reasons why. I mean, we could refuse bail, but from memory, we used to usually go to a magistrate, especially if they had to travel. I think that was one of the policies and procedures in relation to if anybody was traveling.
Mm.
And I mean, in places in major centres like Catherine, Darwin, Tennant Creek, where you had court the next day, you could remand them overnight as a police officer and
Yep.
send them to court the next day. However, in locations where, especially where I was out bush, a remand warrant for them to travel into Darwin, fly in air wing, and that was more. I suppose it was more as an ass covering exercise as well, that we'd actually gone through the proper channels to ensure that this person should be remanded, and
Yeah.
which was not a problem at all.
No.
Um,
So I think what we're talking about, I'll just give it a bit of structure. Oh, excuse me. We'll take it back. So we're talking about police interaction with the judicial process, and what we're talking about is the early on stages of how police have the first interaction with alleged offenders, because we're making an allegation. People will then go to court and be found guilty or not guilty. Everyone understands that. Um, I'll just explain what bail is. I know everyone think, oh, they know what bail is, but the definition of bail is to be at liberty instead of in custody, and then the second part is to be free of a non-custodial order. So basically, um, they are completely at liberty pending a court matter. So you can imagine a drink driver. There's absolutely no requirement for somebody prior to them going to court to be held in custody. They're just on bail. Now, bail can come with conditions. Well, it does come with conditions generally. The first condition can be no conditions, turn up to court. Um, but normally, especially if there was alcohol involved in the offending, it might be a non-alcohol consumption, and there will also be a second part to that that you must submit to a police officer when requested to provide a sample of breath to prove you haven't been drinking. So we get that quite a bit. A big one for kids, especially the unlawful entry crew, was curfew requirements, non-association requirements, non-contact orders, all kinds of different. You can anything you can think of in a bail condition is basically there, and they're
yep.
all legislated. So going back to police can grant bail. If we've arrested somebody out there, it's a relatively minor offence, or it's an offence that we know we don't have a major concern about the reoffending of that particular offender. A sergeant or above, or a police officer for the time being in charge of a police station can grant bail, and they can impose whatever conditions they like. What you were saying about before, and that person can either agree to that or not. When a police officer issues bail or grants bail, if if they don't grant bail, or so if the police officer refuses bail, or they don't like the conditions that the police officer is going to put in place, they have the right to appeal, or not appeal,
Yes,
but to review.
I'd
It's a right to
prefer it.
review.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
they get to review that through a local court judge. So magistrate's an old word, local court judge. So there's on-call judges at all hours of the day. Generally speaking, after 10 p.m. and before 6 a.m., we don't give them a ring. They can sit in the cells overnight, and we can do a bail review at 6 a.m. And then up until 10 p.m. Only because they're going to get phone calls from all over the territory at all hours of the night.
because we don't
So
sleep.
no, they won't sleep at all that night, and they're still at work. It's just an arrangement they came to. So basically, what that means is we will then speak to a magistrate, or sorry, a local court judge, after we have refused bail, and say that, look, we've refused. This person wants to review their bail. We have refused bail for these reasons, and then the magistrate or local court judge will make a determination, having spoken to the person who's refused bail, so the police officer who has refused the bail or imposed conditions, and the person who's subject to those conditions or subject to the refusal of bail. So that just explains it, and sort of applies it to the Bail Act to explain that
Yeah,
bit. But
yeah,
we can move forward, Dave. We'll just finish it off in a minute with you, but we'll move forward into this and explain the prosecution process and the defence process. But yeah, finish off the bail stuff, mate.
yeah. So, and one of those things, and you mentioned most of it there. One of the considerations is repetition of the offence. I know you said that later on, earlier on, but just to give some people a bit of insight, I think it was Dingle and I. We once got a guy remanded for driving unlicensed, which is very, very. I mean, he was remaining in custody. The reason why, though, was he'd been caught and convicted 14 times within the last 12 months, and
Yeah,
he was continually going out and putting people at risk. So that was, and it was only overnight. It was till the next day.
mm,
But so there's certain circumstances. Repetition of the offence is definitely a big one. If you
yeah,
have concerns for the welfare or safety of the victims, or other people, and the community as a whole, that's definitely a big one. Um, I mean, I think you went through most of the considerations that you probably
yeah,
think of.
yeah. Rattle them off.
Yeah. So, and look, all that stuff gives weight. So, if you are a police officer, or even just joining the police, and you get the opportunity to speak to, like Dama said, a local judge, as they're called now, you just go through their history, and go through look at protection of the community is a big one, and that's where the conditions come in. Like you said, the curfew, the no alcohol, stuff like this. There's
Mm,
people that have been even given bail by a magistrate that have broken 5 conditions within the first hour of actually leaving the court. Um,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
and they usually get remanded very quickly after that. But
Actually, you've just reminded me. I'll tell a beautiful story about the fastest arrest for breach of bail I've ever seen in my life.
yep,
It was a matter in Darwin where Strikeforce Trident had arrested a repeat offender, and um, me and another fella just happened to be down at the courthouse that day for some particular reason. I think I was there for a hearing or something, and I'd walked out the front, and I knew that this person had just been granted bail by the court because they'd been previously remanded in custody, and it was a non-association order with a particular person who was in their little group. Anyway, a car pulled up out the front, and the driver of the car got out, and they get up there and they do the "Hey, Bruss, what's up, Bruss?" and they're doing the whole monkey grip, bloody handshake, and all the rest of it. And he was one of the people listed in the do not contact on bail. Man, my mate walked over there and went, "Hey, champ, how you going?" Boom. "Hey, Bruss, you're under arrest for breach of bail. Come with me." And they kicked on a little bit, but I mean, we won the day. It was never going to happen. And we just called for a cage. We were down there in our vehicles, and we just called for a cage, and we got a breach of bail straight up. Just walked out of the courthouse and got picked up in a car by a person who was bailed not to contact.
yeah.
And that was the fastest arrest. But look, we'll
Mate, I'll just want to add one last thing there, only because there's a lot of comments, and you hear a lot about it, that a lot of the public blame the magistrate, or the local judges, or the judges in relation to bail. And this is another thing we will talk about, but this is where we come into the separation of powers, because the judges are also constrained by the availability of room within the prisons, so on and so forth, the legislation that surrounds it, and all that sort of stuff. So, if anybody is that's listening to this that does judges, I know a lot of them, and look, the ones there was probably only two that I ever had concerns with, and one, he actually turned around and was very ship shape, towards the after he was only a new magistrate at the judge at the time, and he came around very, very quickly, because he suddenly realised the difference when you go from being a defence lawyer to a judge. Yeah, and I had quite a lot of respect for him later on. And he did make a couple of mistakes, but I mean, everybody makes mistakes,
to human as to were.
especially when they're learning a new job. But yeah, just before you judge a lot of them, just know there are other things at play, that restrict them in relation to either remanding or giving bail.
Yeah,
So there's other circumstances that the public are unaware of, I think,
yeah.
is all I want to say.
No, it's true. And I mean, even then, there are still some pretty wild bail granted. I mean,
Oh,
we
definitely. Yeah.
especially Strikeforce Trident, I used to see some extremely wild people bailed, and we go, on what universe could that person be granted bail? We've got a
Yeah.
person with a criminal history of 267, and all of a sudden, this person's now been given bail, and um, they're on their third count of aggravated robbery in company. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but if you and I went out together tonight and robbed a service station with weapons and assaulted the person behind the bar, we wouldn't be podcasting anytime soon, Schultzy. So, like, some of it just boggled the mind how they were granted bail, and,
Well,
and
Mate, I'll just give a quick story because I know people do like stories. I had one where we arrested this guy. It was a domestic violence matter, and I was working in the family and domestic violence unit at the time. Now we arrested him. He had flogged his missus up, basically saying he had told a person earlier in the day that he was going to kill his wife that night, and he beat her up so much that with a brick on the head that she had put a hand there and smashed her hand. She was in ICU for a couple of days, and we arrested him very promptly. The next morning, we got called out. And anyway, I did the bail Connor, basically refusing bail, and the magistrate gave him bail, unbeknownst to why. Like, there's no way in I mean, the presumption. So, sorry, I'll go back again. There is a presumption. So you have
Yeah,
for, neutral, and against. And it
yeah,
depends whether it fits within the legislation within the Bail Act of where that is. I won't go into detail because it's too
yeah. You need a bloody
complicated.
just about a law degree to understand it
Yeah,
all. But
that's right. And anyway, he was against. However, the magistrate did give him bail, and that's the one I was speaking. Within a couple of hours, he had breached the 5 conditions that he got bail on,
yeah,
and almost killed her. He ended up stabbing her a couple of times in the head and chest with a shovel.
yeah,
And it was very lucky that police went to a noise complaint and found her, yeah, out in the backyard. It was quite horrific, that one. And we got
mm,
called out again that night and basically dealt with him. And she then spent another, I don't know, I don't know, it was, yeah, because he must spend a day or two in jail. And then, yeah, she was in ICU for a couple of weeks after that one.
yeah.
So, and look, that is, I mean, they are some of the situations. There's no reason why that person should have got bail. There is also something in the Northern Territory, and I know this was used on one occasion, where if the prosecution disagrees with the magistrate's call on bail, they can actually ask it to be referred by the Supreme Court judges.
Wasn't used on one occasion. I saw it used weekly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There was yeah, so section 60 something of the yeah, there was a right to review. So
Yep.
basically what that is that if a local court judge granted bail to an offender and the prosecution believed that it was in the interest of the protection of the community that be reviewed, they had the right to immediately review that to the Supreme Court, so that the person then became remanded in custody again, and the matter went to the Supreme Court for a judge to actually so a Supreme Court judge to make determination as to whether the person should get bail. So I've
Yep.
seen that invoked a number of times,
Yeah.
um, especially with our really recidivist, unlawful entry, car stealing, fast driving little buggers. We quite often would go, this guy is going to be breaking into 5 houses tonight and steal 3 cars. And they would, they bloody would.
Yep.
They'd go on
Yep.
rampages. They'd get out of jail and they'd probably be right for a couple of weeks, and then they'd get back with their mates and they'd be just a blowout. They'd just go nuts and break into houses all over the place
Yep.
and
Which
go from
which
there.
then puts yeah, which then puts so much stress on resources. It's not
Oh,
funny.
not to mention the impact on the community. Like
Well,
being broken
exactly.
into is a huge deal. Like people don't forget about the night your house was broken into. They'll
No.
talk about it in 10 years about, oh, I remember the night those bastards came and stole our car. It's an
Yep.
invasion of your personal space. Like your home is your castle. No one, the outside world is the outside world, but in your castle, you're the king or the queen. So
Yep.
no, no, no. I'm very, very protective of people's inner sanctum.
Oh,
And
definitely.
for people to get bail for just continually breaching people's inner sanctum, to me, was not acceptable. And then
No.
stealing their cars, and like, these are productive people who go to work and pay their taxes and raise good kids and all the rest of it. They don't need some little scumbag breaking into their house who's done it 1,000 times before, and then stealing their cars and playing out real life Grand Theft Auto on the streets with me and my mates.
Mate,
Because we didn't lose much, we won most of the time.
yep,
So
yeah, oh, definitely.
mm,
And look, and you're dead right. I mean, then you put on the stress of the people because then they're continually worried.
oh
I
yeah.
mean, some people would even get in a certain form of PTSD or worrying about whether they got broken into again.
Mm.
I know even when you hear about it on the news, I've got friends that sit there and take extra precautions because they're worried about getting broken into.
Mm.
So it actually puts fear in the community when these people don't get remanded and they don't get, basically dealt with what would we see as appropriately. And before you get into the do-gooders and all this sort of stuff, saying that I know they're saying they're breaching human rights and all that sort of stuff. Those people that commit those crimes are breaching human rights every single time they step out of their house.
Constantly.
So they
And you
are
think they get
invading.
the other thing? Firstly, you're not breaching people's human rights. You get very, very well looked after in watch houses and
Oh,
prisons and the rest of. You
yes.
get all the medical care you could ever want. You get all the food you could ever want. You don't get any freedom, but you do get lots and lots of care and attention, and you do not lose your human rights. Let's be
Yep.
real honest about that. And I
Yep.
can tell you that firsthand. I've been in plenty of prisons, not just watch houses. I've been inside plenty of prisons, and most of the time they're all manicured gardens. And yeah, I know bad shit happens in there between the offenders, and there's the occasional time where things go wrong. But generally speaking, you get looked after beautifully in jail
Oh,
to the point where a lot of people in the Northern Territory commit offences just to go back to jail
yes.
because that's
And
their happy place.
actually,
And in
oh,
the
sorry.
Indigenous communities, and also in the watch houses, it'll be the first time in weeks some of these people have had their medical problems dealt with. Yeah, there's absolutely no breach there. But you are correct. They constantly breach other people's human rights all the time.
Yep. Yep. Mate, and I'll just actually throw in there one thing you said. There's a case up in Darwin, I believe, that they tried to break into, people try to break into the prison for their Christmas lunch, because they were there on a Christmas sometime. So
Gotta love it.
that's how well you get looked after.
I do remember a bunch of youths broke out of the Dondale Detention Centre. Oh, a good many years ago now, to be over 10 years ago. Anyway, a wild pursuit, extreme break ins all over the place. They stole a few cars, did some wild stuff, caught up with family, and then they drove their car. Google it, it's there, the footage of it. They drove their car straight back through the roller door on the front, so the Sally port at the front of the Dondale reception area. They drove their car back in, the stolen car, back into Dondale. The irony was they'd driven back in and been taken into custody by, I think police were on their tail. They got arrested by police at the scene, thinking they were just going to go straight back into their detention. No,
Yeah.
they had to be arrested, taken into custody, taken to a watch house, put before the court, and then put back into detention. So, anyway, it was a wild show, mate. But that just shows that it can't be too bad. The fact that they went out, had a wild time, then drove back to the detention centre.
No, yeah, well, exactly. And look, honestly, and I can tell you how many times did we do prisoner conveyance from Catherine to Darwin? I cannot remember. You could almost at Hayes Creek used to stop and usually get them maybe a bite to eat or go to the toilet if they had to and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And you could almost let them out without handcuffs on. They would go to the store and come back to the cage,
Yeah.
because
I mean, you wouldn't, but you
no,
could.
no, you
They didn't
wouldn't. But
care. They were completely
you
compliant.
could almost get away with it because they were
Yeah.
that compliant.
Yeah.
Um, and
No,
like
I do. I used to laugh. I tell you what, a cigarette goes a long way.
oh yes,
I knew so many police. I mean, I was a smoker for a while. I quit in 2011, but prior to that, I was a smoker. And then after that, for a little while, I used to keep cigarettes because they were just such a good way to calm people down, for one. So, here, mate, have a smoke, you know. But I knew a lot of coppers who were smokers who go, "Hey, have a dart, mate, you'll be right." And it just solved all the problems. If they could have a smoke, they'd do anything. It was fine. They didn't care they're
yeah,
going to jail. They'd stress
definitely.
out for a cigarette. If you give them a cigarette, you remove the stress, they'd get back in the car and go from there.
Yep. Actually, sorry, mate. I'm going to just segue just a little bit there. I did have one case. This woman was known to be slightly mental. Well, she's kleptomaniac, so she just had a thing of stealing. But she was also, people would think she was mentally ill. She wasn't. She was actually quite sane. And I started dealing with her. And anyway, I had one of my probies looking after her one night in the cells, and I said, if there's any dramas, give me a call. I'm just over at the house. Anyway, they gave me a call and said, oh, she's having thoughts of self harm. So right, so anyway, I walk back over there, and anyway, by the time I get there, they said, oh, she said if she has a cigarette, the voices go away. I said, oh right, okay. So anyway,
Pretty
I
simple
said I
solution.
knew this one quite well. I dealt with her a number of times before. I said, all right, come out the back, have a cigarette. Anyway, I gave her a cigarette, And she's sitting there. She's just about finished. She looks up at me and she goes, "If I have two, the voices are gone completely." And I said, "I'll
Well
tell you what,
played.
now
Well played, that woman. I'd take me hat. I'd give her 3. Good on you, sweetheart. You get him into your love.
No. Anyway, I said to her, "Oh, look, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a couple in the morning if you go to bed now and go to sleep." And she did. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, no. It's like, oh, it's
Sorry,
very
mate.
common.
You can continue on.
I can't remember what I was saying. That was better anyway. It's all good. Yeah.
So yeah, so what we're talking about basically the relationship between the police and the I suppose judicial. And look, and look, even this comes to defense lawyers and all that sort of stuff as well. I was a prosecutor for a number of years. I got thrown in the deep end. I really got thrown in the deep end. My introduction into actually prosecuting, I think good old Kim Chambers, big shout out to him. He was a prosecutor out bush, and yeah, they wanted me to become a prosecutor for Bush, so it didn't put so much strain on him. And anyway, he got me up to Maningrida for a court there, and he said, "Well, just watch what I do." And I'll give a shout out to Greg Kavanagh, was the magistrate at the time, or the local judge, and he is one. He runs a very strict court.
Mm.
I know the bloke personally, but and utmost respect for him, but he does run a very tight ship when it comes to court. And anyway, he said, "You just watch the first few times I do this, and then I'll pass them over to you." As a police prosecutor, you're only dealing with the bail and arrest. So basically, it's just your first appearance on cases. There are ones where if they plead guilty, you will also give your submissions as to what you believe the sentence should incorporate.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but honestly, one day I dealt with 180 cases in one day. So
Yeah.
you can understand they had 4 defense lawyers, 1 police prosecutor. I had 180. They had 180 between 4. So
Yeah.
you are really under the pump, and you kind of have to be aware of all the court cases. It's pretty full on. But yeah, mate, that was my induction into prosecuting, and I then did it for a number of years after that. I did love it. I did really enjoy court, although it was definitely very stressful.
Yeah, so I prosecuted a couple of times in Borroloola, and like I say, when we say we're not like your DPP prosecutor, so your Director of Public Prosecution's office. In other jurisdictions, called the ODP, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, so ODPP. That is basically the public alleger, so they will allege this has happened. So they introduce the matters to court, and then it's the job of defence, which are the lawyers, to defend that. Now, this is the really basics of how court works, how our judicial system works. At the very lowest end, especially in bush court, quite often it's the local police sergeant who will be the prosecutor. And I've done it a few times, nowhere near as many as you, but I've done it a few times out in Borroloola. And I'll never forget the first time where it was all me all day. And I got sat down, and the defence lawyer, cause the mention comes from the defence. So I'm sitting down, I've got this bloody metric ton of files next to me, and they're all laid out in how they're going to present them. And they go, "Oh, mentioning the matter of such and such." And I looked across, and they're all meant to be there because I'd laid them out in order that we've agreed we're going to go. And it's not there. And I've said, "I don't have the file, Your Honour." Anyway, and Sergeant, come on. And I was like, "Shit, I had nothing to do with this. I just got thrown in, like, bloody hell." Yeah, I didn't say that. I'm thinking it. Anyway, and then he goes, "Well, in that not being the case, if the police haven't got their act together, then I'd like to mention," because I always have a crack. And they go, "I'd like to mention the matter of this." And I'm going, "I don't have that file either." Anyway, the magistrate at this stage has gone, "Oh, come on, Sergeant." And I'm going, "I fucking don't know where the file is. Like, what do you want me to do? I just sat down, I've laid them all out in the agreed order, and they're not there. Like, what do you want me to do?" Yeah. Anyway, so I'm ringing. I said, "Look, I can make a phone call, but we can move on. I do have this matter. I do have these matters are right here. I've got all these ones." And he's just, "Well, I suppose we'll inconvenience my client a little further with this." And this is a bloke we're going to have like morning tea with. And I'm sitting there going, "I'm going to punch your head in, you prick." Anyway, and this is my first experience. So I pull this next one across and go, and I'm just mentioning it. So there's not a lot to do from a police prosecution point of view. You just read through what the allegation is. So you read the statement of facts,
Yep.
and then the defence lawyer will go guilty, not guilty. And if it's not guilty, they'll just adjourn it for a hearing. And if it's guilty, then they'll read out mitigating circumstances and why they've done this, and I'll just go, yep, no worries.
Oh,
Even to the
actually,
point,
Dana, sorry, mate. I'm just going to
yeah,
correct you there. You read the charges out, and then
yeah,
they
read the
plead
charges.
not
That's right. Yeah,
guilty, and then if
that's
they
right.
plead
Then they
guilty,
enter the
you
plea, and
read
then you
the
read
statement
the
of
statement
facts.
of facts. That's
Yep.
right. Yeah. So yeah, you read out the charges, and yeah, no, you are correct, mate. I did do it all, but yeah, we a few times. Look, this is my first time ever in court, and I'm dancing already because of the first two cases they called. I didn't have the file, so don't I look great? Anyway, the next I remember one. The next lawyer stepped up, and she mentioned the matter, and I had the matter, and it was I was the OLC of the case. So had that gone to hearing, I could not prosecute. Well, it wouldn't. You wouldn't. Police don't prosecute hearings. That becomes a DPP lawyer who prosecutes the
Yep.
hearings. So anyway, I got that one. And I'd spoken to them because what can happen is you can speak outside, and the defence lawyer will come. Look, I'm going to offer a plea of guilt for this, this, this. I do think there's a little bit of evidence lacking in regards to this, but we're going to offer a plea for that. But we'll remove this one, and the case will be adjourned. And especially for really simple traffic matters, you just go, yeah, that
Yep.
makes sense. You look at it and go, look, there's a couple of the major offences, unlicensed, whatever it is, drink driving, blah blah blah. You look at them and go, yep, no trouble. And you just do these little things outside of court just to get it resolved so you can get the matters through. Because you got to remember the Northern Territory community is a very busy place. And drink driving's, I'm not saying it's not serious, but when you've got people with breach DVO cause serious harm, then it kind of goes down the level a bit. So
Yep.
anyway, I went through and we read them all out, and we're just back and forth, and I got to know the process pretty well. So it wasn't too bad. The other thing is that you get to, and this is very early on, and I mean this is later on, but I never prosecuted, but I certainly understood the whole process. I actually felt confident that I could prosecute a hearing because
Mm.
I understood points of proof and I understood how to disprove and prove and all the rest of them.
Yep.
So the adversarial action, and a lot of people get emotional, and you've got to remove emotion. There is no emotion in there. It's evidence to prove this or that. The points of proof are laid out within the legislation. I mean, we're not going to give you a law lesson, but to prove assault, you must prove that a person assaulted, which means and there's a definition of assault within the Criminal Code Act,
Yep.
a person, that person did not consent to the assault, and the aggravations will be, and in circumstances of aggravation, that caused harm. Well, that's a definition. Like harm is pain, blah, 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 blah. If we want to prove serious harm, you have to get a doctor to say that, yes, this person would have died had there not been medical intervention. So there's a whole lot to it. And you've got to prove all this stuff before you put the prosecution file or the brief of evidence before the court. So there's a hell of a lot to it that a lot of people don't understand. But when you're
Yep.
sitting in court, and especially once you've been down, you're 10 years in by this stage, I'm looking at this stuff going, I could prosecute this right now. I can pull the evidence. I'm happy to question the witnesses because I wouldn't be emotional and say, tell me this, tell me that, tell me more about that, tell me this.
Yep.
It's and you'd hear them bring up the briefs, and I'd bring up the defences, or try and slip up the witness for the prosecution, and I'd go, no, no, well, tell me more about that. Tell me what. So you'd extract that information if you needed to, especially when you've put the file together and you know what the evidence is. So
Well, I think that's one of the joys of actually prosecuting your local area as well.
yeah,
You're also very aware of the cases, and like you said, it. And we've mentioned this before. It actually makes you a far better investigator once you've argued these things in court.
oh, definitely,
Because
yep,
you start to learn the things, and I know you mentioned before, and like this is what you got to understand is like say that day 180 cases, and like there's usually a lot, usually over 100
yeah,
in a court day when you're running out bush because you don't have them every day. So you're sitting there, you are going, and there's four, anywhere between probably three and four, two. No, I think it was always three and four. They always had heaps of defense lawyers, probably
yeah,
because notice cashed up. I'm not really sure why, but but anyway, but they're coming at you all day, and they're coming even while somebody is up there in the box. They will actually come over to your table, whisper something, and you will have to turn around and say, "Yep, I'll come at you in the break, and we can discuss this."
yeah,
And you said there like sometimes you will drop a couple of charges, because you
Yeah.
know that you will get them on the other ones, which are the important ones. So
Yeah.
a lot of times you'll drop the lesser ones, or even one that might be simultaneous. Because look, at the end of the day, they're only going to get served concurrently anyway.
Exactly right.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So if you're getting say 7 years on one for one charge and you get 7 years on the other, the magistrate's not going to put them away for 14 years. They'll
No.
put them away for 7. I mean, that won't
Put
if they
put
won't
them
even
away
get
for
7.
6 months. If
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah. 100,
But
yeah, community custodial order. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. But yeah, so what you do is you sit there and go, okay, well, if they're going to be served concurrently, this one, it's iffy whether we got the evidence to prove this in relation to what I've got in front of me. So to get it gone through today, you'll plead to this one, we'll
Yeah.
drop this one, and then we'll move on from there. And that is all day. That is what you were doing all day.
Yeah. It's the sheer practicality of it. It's
Yep.
just, there is just so much. It's, I used to laugh at, I'm talking about Junda. I mentioned it earlier because it's underwater now. Well, my uncle happened to be a copper out there in 1988, 1989, through to about 1990. And I remember going down to the police station to pull hay bales, or to help as a little kid to pull hay bales out of the cells at Junda Police Station because they needed to feed horses. So that's where they keep hay in the cells because the cells hadn't been used in 10 years.
Yeah.
Not so in the Northern Territory communities. They are a high cycle place.
Oh
You don't
yeah.
keep anything in the cells. They keep people every day. So it's a different world. So it's yeah, the Northern Territory is a wild show, and those communities are incredible. I remember something popped up on my feed today actually, and I was looking at it, and two members had spoken out. And this is a couple of years old. This is probably 5 years ago. They spoke out about PTSD and how the police needs to improve on their response to how officers get PTSD, basically. And I knew both of them, and they're in the public domain. So it was Nick Carter and Derek Hartshorn, and I knew both of them. And Derek Hartshorn made a very good point. He goes, "We had an incident." He said, "Lead up to my breakdown, we'd had four. He had a panic attack and a breakdown out at Borroloola, actually." This is in the public record. He said it to journalists in a public television show. But I know Derek, and he's a bloody good fella. He's a nice bloke. He was saying how they didn't get any sleep for 4 days. They got 3 hours sleep in 4 days, and most of that was in 20-minute chunks. And then they got called out again, and they're just being told by the territory duty superintendent, "I'm sorry, boys, there's no option. You have to go. It's this serious." And they're
Yep.
like, "We may as well have drunk a bottle of whiskey. We can't. I can barely think straight. I can't even work out how to put my pants on." So yeah, it's a hell of a show out in the bush
It
in the
is.
Northern Territory.
Yep, definitely, mate. I'll just another funny one, and I'll give a quick one to Elizabeth Morris. She won't mind me mentioning her. The first time I was out at Borroloola, and I got out there, and anyway, poor old Al Green was just relieving out there, I think, as a sergeant when I first got out there, and court was coming up, and I said, "Al, said do you want me to do court?" And he goes, "Oh, that'd be fantastic." So anyway, I've only been out there. That was just after you left, I think, or I
Yeah,
think were you still there, or you just left, or something? I
I think
think.
I'd left. Yeah, or
Yeah.
just yeah,
And anyway, so I get there up in front of court. I've no information on these cases apart from putting them together to go into court. And anyway, I rock up there, and the judge, she sits there, and there's a question about the location of this thing. Of course, I've only just arrived out of Borroloola, so I've got no idea about where all these little communities and spots are. Anyway,
yeah,
and she goes, "Sergeant, can you give us information in relation to where this is?" I said, "Sorry, Your Honour, I've got no idea."
yeah.
Anyway, then a bit later on, she comes up again like a similar thing, and she goes, and I said, "Your Honour," she goes, "You're not much help, are you, Sergeant?" "No, sorry, Your Honour, I'm not."
No, I
But
had no idea. What? How do you spell Borroloola?
but
Yeah.
she had my mum and dad were actually in the court because they were out there at the time, and they thought it was quite funny. Yeah, but he's sitting there just going, "Yeah, no, Your Honour, I'm no help at all when it comes
Yeah.
to
Give me 12
location."
months, I'll help you. Right now, I've got nothing. Yeah. Well, mate, I reckon that'll do us. We're at 50, so that'll do.
Well,
But,
yeah, bloody hell, how did we get to 50?
I don't know, because we hadn't even started talking about what we were going to talk about. That's
No,
okay.
exactly.
No,
I've
no,
still got
all's
many
well.
stories to go.
Oh god, yeah, no doubt. No, all's well. We'll be back next week. We yeah, keep it real. All the best out in West Queensland at the moment. You're getting drowned, but yeah, a lot of people out there, they're very hardy, and they understand that this is going to make cattle really fat, so they
Well,
can
that's
handle
right.
being isolated. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. They are hardy and they are tough, and
bloody oath.
they always bounce back.
Yeah. On that note, mate, catch it.
All
I'll
right,
catch you next week.
all right. See you all.